Welcome, boxing friends, to a thrilling journey through the annals of the sport of fisticuffs. In this special installment, we Mike Tyson. With his unmatched ferocity and unwavering determination, Tyson emerged as an unstoppable force in the ring, leaving in his wake a trail of defeated opponents and shattered records. But in the world of boxing, even titans have their moments of vulnerability. Join us as we explore the epic clashes that saw the Colossus Tyson fall. From dazzling strategic moves to devastating blows, each encounter offers fascinating insight into the skill, bravery, and resilience of those who challenged the reigning champion. Prepare to relive the intensity of these historic moments as we unearth the stories behind the men who managed to shake the throne of Iron Mike. This is the chronicle of the 5 ring warriors who defied the unbreakable and left an indelible mark on boxing legend. Tyson vs. Holyfield, 25 years of the most remembered bite in boxing history. In the third round of the fight, held in Las Vegas in 1997, the former world champion bit off not one but both of Holyfield's ears until he ripped off a piece and spit it on the canvas. With this action, Tyson may not have established himself as the greatest boxer of all time, but he was unquestionably the most fearsome. And although he officially lost that fight, his name was engraved in the memory of all sports fans and even became a reference in popular culture. But how and why did that infamous bite happen? To understand the surreal moment, we have to go back a quarter of a century to June 28th, but in 1997. The scene of the bout was Las Vegas, and it pitted Tyson against Holyfield, who had already met the year before, with Evander winning by knockout. Needless to say that the good Mike was thirsty for revenge. That of 1996 against Holyfield had been the second defeat in his entire career, which at that time, at the age of 30, wanted to return him to the top of the boxing world. Mike Iron Tyson, he was nicknamed at the time, was coming off a streak of knockout victories, some of the fastest on record in the boxing world. He was fresh out of jail, where he had been sent in 1992, and since his release he had fought 4 fights in 13 months, winning 2 versions of the world title. None of the fights went beyond the 3rd round. Mike's iron fist felt heavy and he threw with surprising quickness, speed and power, his 2 main weapons, which were the formula for making him one of the most powerful boxers ever to don the gloves. They were also the virtues that made him obviate his apparent disadvantage, for at 178 meters tall, he was shorter than the boxers who had dominated the sport at the time. The fruit of a fractured family, an absent father, and a childhood marked by hardship and poverty. As a child, Mike learned to deal with the blows of life, and after suffering bullying at school, he found in his fists the way to return a few blows. Since his debut in 1985, Tyson took the boxing world by storm, and just when he thought he was invincible, Holyfield came along and brought him back down to earth, or worse, to the canvas. That KO of Tyson in the 10th round was one of the toughest defeats for the boxer, especially because according to his autobiography, Undisputed Truth, Holyfield's was a battle he should have fought much earlier. If I had fought him, Holyfield, in 1991, when I was supposed to fight him originally, I would have knocked him out. He knows that, everybody in his camp knows that. The best thing that happened to him was that I went to jail. That's when I wasted all my time, Tyson writes. With all that background, the day came for the big rematch, which was billed as the Sound and the Fury, but went down in history as the Bite Fight. Despite having trained twice as hard for this fight and having the desire for revenge in his heart, the truth is that the first 2 rounds of the fight went Holyfield's way and Tyson was in trouble. Perhaps that's why, in the middle of the 3rd round, Mike decided to throw himself at his opponent's right ear, tearing off a bit of cartilage and spitting him to the ground. Outrage took over the arena, but no one wanted to stop the fight, especially because of the great expectation generated by the Las Vegas gamblers. So incredibly, Tyson was allowed to continue with a 2-point penalty. But once the fight restarted, Mike went on the attack again, this time biting and tearing off a piece of Holyfield's left ear. It was an absolute scandal. Tyson was disqualified from the contest, and a massive brawl broke out in the ring as Iron Mike tried to work his way to Evander again. According to Mike, the bite was a product of the heat of the fight, and a retaliation for Holyfield's continued headbutting, one of which had caused a cut over Tyson's eye in the second round that referee Mills Lane ignored. Critics suggested that Tyson simply knew he was on his way to being beaten by Holyfield once again and was looking for a way out. Many observers who have analyzed the fight in the years since have pointed out that for the third round, Tyson came out without his mouthguard, claiming that this proves the premeditation of the bite. However, Tyson has disqualified this theory, saying that throughout his career he always took beatings like a man. "Any fight anybody saw me lose, I took my beating like a man. I never sat down," Tyson said, adding that the reason for the sudden desire to bite Holyfield's ears was, "I was angry, I was mad, I lost my composure." The night Buster Douglas knocked out Tyson, how it was the biggest upset in boxing history. 30 years ago in Japan, the biggest upset in heavyweight history took place. Buster Douglas, the challenger nobody considered, knocked out the hitherto invincible Mike Tyson. The moment Tyson knocked Douglas down, the referee's long count, the reaction of the boxing world, the beginning of the end of a voracious champion. Let's start in the first person. That night of February 11th, 1990, 30 years ago, sleep overcame me. But believe it or not, even in those years, at the beginning of the 90s, there were not so many televised sporting events. There was no question of missing any of them, especially a world title fight with the best boxer of the moment. The problem with this fight was that it did not promise any suspense. The disparity in the preview was so great that expectations were minimal. There was an advantage. Surely I would not go to sleep so late. Tyson's opponents did not last long, except this one, a little overweight, without any record of great relevance, very low in the betting. Only a madman could bet on him. In the 8th round, it looked like it was all over, but the fight went on. In the 10th round, the outcome did come, but not the one that was expected. That night, I was alone in my house. The others had gone to a party and would arrive very late. Those were times without cell phones. And in my family, we had an infallible system to send messages. We would stick a sign on the door so that whoever came home would know what they needed. This system included communications that had to do with family logistics. If you were not going to sleep, if you were not having dinner at home, or to inform the rest of the family of news they had to know before reading the morning paper, a revolution, a famous death, or news of vital importance. Racing's purchase of a centre forward, for example. That midnight, I noticed one of those posters on the inside of the door. It was an important and unexpected news. Tyson got knocked out. It was a shock. You can't call it anything else. It may have been one of the biggest in the history of the sport, without the social dimension of the collective disaster of the Maracanazo, but with that of personal tragedy. That night, when Tyson could have won, his downfall began. Or actually, his collapse began to be externalized, a collapse that had begun silently, ghostly, and inevitable some time before. The fight was at the Tokyo Dome. Japan had taken the fight, offering one of the biggest stars of the time more than $6 million. The expectation of the organizers was not to witness a great sporting spectacle, an even contest, but simply to see live, up close, a legend of the sport. Mike Tyson was undefeated, and he looked invincible, a force of nature who knew no weakness, who destroyed his opponents. The punishment he inflicted on them was cruel and painful. Up to that moment, although some few had endured the 15 rounds, the differences he marked were ostentatious. He slaughtered them. Tyson was destined to mark an era. It looked like his reign would be a long one. Let's take a closer look at Tyson's record so far. 37 fights won, none lost, 32 by knockout. 17 of his opponents had not made it past the first round. The specialized journalists expected another brief massacre. No more than 2 minutes of action. Larry Merchant, perhaps America's most famous commentator, said, "This fight is over before it starts. At most, it will be over a few seconds later." The first surprise of the night came in the first round. Douglas had no fear, no running away around the ring. He stood and put up a fight. He traded punches with fury. It didn't look like a great tactic. It just looked like an honorable, early death certificate. But there was something about those rounds. A presence, something we didn't want to see at the time. Mike Tyson wasn't himself. His physical condition was less than usual and his ferocity more lacking. Something of that barbaric instinct, of that fruition to hit the opponent with all his strength, had vanished. His movements were lethargic. He couldn't find his way back into the fight. Douglas, on the other hand, was fast and had a tactic. Used the jab to keep him away, to bother his opponent. And from time to time, he would land a good punch. That way, accepting exchanges, he was exposed to Tyson knocking him out at some crossroads. His tactic was not suicidal either. Every time he was overwhelmed, he went to the clinch, to embrace the world champion to stop the actions. At the end of the 5th round, the action was even. Douglas had landed as many good punches, or maybe more than Tyson. But hardly anyone cared. Everything suggested that Douglas would tire, or that Tyson would make his power predominate. But in that break, one of Tyson's eyelids swelled up like a balloon. The eye was closed. The next few rounds were similar. In the 8th, Douglas was emboldened and dominated Tyson. But with very little to go, when the challenger was hounding him against the ropes, Tyson landed a furious right uppercut. The impact was full, and it literally lifted Douglas into the air. He lay flat on his back on the canvas. When the count reached 9, he got to his feet. As soon as he was given the pass, the saving bell rang. But that count was not a normal one. It was a long count. It seemed as if the referee Octavio Mayrin had difficulty remembering the order of the numbers. He did everything in slow motion. It took him 14 seconds to count to 9. When everyone thought the order had been restored, the fight continued. In the 9th round, Tyson came out to define the match, to finish it. Sloppy, blind, without energy. He was drained in less than a minute. Douglas was recovering. In the next round came the big surprise. Douglas waited for the champion and moved him with uppercut. Then, a string of crosses with both hands. Tyson's legs were flaming. Buster Douglas kept attacking. Tyson, exhausted, didn't fight back, just threw a few sloppy punches. Lack of habit or overconfidence, not considering the possibility of defeat, made him not even try to lock up his opponent. Suddenly, a series of quick jabs, an upward punch, and 4 or 5 direct punches. All of them accurate, definitive. Tyson fell on his back with no answers. Mayrin continued his mathematical difficulties. Crouching close to the face of the sprawled champion, he showed him his fingers. Perhaps Tyson believed that one of the effects of the knockout was to see everything happen at a slower speed. In an image unworthy of his background, Tyson, absolutely dazed, crawled across the ring. He grabbed, as best he could, the mouthguard that had flown off and failed to put it in his mouth. He was in no mood for fine motor skills. The guard went in perpendicular to his teeth, and more than half of it was left out. The referee did not know how to delay the count. The champion got to his feet, but his eyes were vacant and his legs flimsy. He rocked forward, and Mayron embraced him before he returned to the canvas. It was all over. Buster Douglas was the new heavyweight champion of the world, the most amazing champion in history.